Good morning. Today is the 6th of March, the year of 2012. My name is Larry Harris. I'm a volunteer here at the Palm Springs Air Museum in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the records and histories of our country's military conflicts. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews with veterans and civilians who participated in these conflicts. And today we have the privilege and honor of interviewing Mr. Joe Szep. We will ask Mr. Szep about his past histories, is connected to the war and the war effort. A very interesting story indeed. Mr. Szep, would you please state your name and spell it and give your birth date while I adjust the camera?
My name is Joe Szep, or Joseph Szep. Last name's S-Z-E-P. I was born in the town of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, on 1011 Mechanic Street in 1916, January 15th, and lived my first 18 years in Bethlehem, having done the usual kindergarten, first lower grades, middle grades, and high school. Now the interesting part in high school is that even though we were part of the school system, our particular avenue of education was industrial, and we were actually moved to an old abandoned school building. The reason for the type of learning that we got in industrial high school is because the nearby Bethlehem Steel Company would usually recruit their engineers from the graduating classes, and it worked out real well for them. It was not so suitable for my desires because I wanted to get into the aircraft business. At the graduation in 1934, I could not find a university nearby that would teach aeronautical engineering. So I went to the private sector. There was a college in West Illinois, across the river from St. Louis, and it was called Parks Air College. And they had light flying instruction and mechanic instructions, so that I was able to get a Bachelor of Science degree in 2 years. Now you kind of wonder, hey, these regular colleges take 4 years. Yeah, but we went 40 hours a week, 48 weeks out of the year, and it was schoolwork all the time. Part of each day or each week was spent in the shops learning about the structures and so on of airplanes. And then the rest of the time we were either in class or drawing up things that pertain to airplanes. So I ended up after 2 years with a Bachelor of Science degree.
And how many years was it? In 2 years, did you say?
In 2 years,
wow.
Yes. From 1934 June till 1936 June. Ending up with a Bachelor of Science degree plus a mechanic's license for both airframe and engine, and a pilot's license for private flying.
So you did get your private license to fly?
Yes.
Yes.
I flew quite a bit after that before the war, but that's another story. What I wanted to get at.
What type of planes or plane or planes did you fly?
I soloed in well, anyway,
Well, it isn't important.
low wing airplane, which had, of course, dual controls, and we had an instructor for. The requirement was that you fly dual for 10 hours before you could solo, which is a little more than what usually is done in other areas. They usually fly solo after 5, 6, 7 hours, but this was done to make sure, of course, that the instruction was proper and so on. But the airplane I did solo in was a Kinner Sportster, 2-place, single engine, and then I went on to a Travel Air, in which I spent probably 20 or so hours doing flight work. I flew a monoplane, the monocoop, yes, for 5 hours, which was to give us cabin experience, because we would be in a cabin, whereas all the other airplanes were open air. And took my test and successfully passed it. One of the requirements of a test is that you had to make the airplane spin and then pull out, going in the same direction. You were required to make 3 rotations and then pull out. So that was part of the qualifying for the private license. It's different these days. They do not require spin demonstrations if you want your private license now. It happened that the school had contacted Lockheed and other companies about my being available, along with several others, and sure enough, Lockheed told the school I would have me out in Burbank right after graduation, which is what I did. My parents came out to see me get my certificates, and they bought a train ticket from St. Louis to Los Angeles, plus gave me $50 pocket money. And so it took 3 days for the train to go from St. Louis to Los Angeles. So I traveled in a day coach, or whatever they call it, where no beds, just the seat. And
those old trains were fun, weren't they? You had to ride backwards half the time if you were lucky to get a seat going forward.
The lucky thing is they were air conditioned, and this was June in 1936, and I got off the train in Los Angeles and wondered, now, okay, where is Burbank? I happened to run across a taxi fellow who was idle without any passengers, and asked him where Burbank was. And he told me it's about 20 or 30 miles out to the north of Los Angeles. Well, how much will it cost to take me there? He said, $30.
Whoa, a lot of money in those days.
That kind of stopped me for a minute, but I had to get to Burbank. So I agreed, and he drove me out there and dumped me. Well, I got out near the gate of Lockheed. Well, across the street from Lockheed was a drugstore, and not knowing what to do, I went in and asked that the fellow in charge, the druggist, where could I stay that night? And he said, well, luckily we have room. We do take care of Lockheed boys, and we have 4 or 5 already in the back room where you could stay, which is fine. But I also asked him, I'm probably going to be here for good. Where do I find a room to rent?
Mm-hmm.
And he steered me down the street, or told me where to go, and it was at a home, private home, of Mr. and Mrs. Brooks. And
You still remember that name?
Oh yes, I made arrangements to use one of their bedrooms, and it just happened that another Lockheed fella was there already. So and the rent was $3.50 a week. A week. Yeah, a week. I'm sorry. So I stayed there for a couple of years. Got to Lockheed on a Monday morning, and no paperwork, no nothing. They said, go to such and such department, and they'll put you to work. Well, it was the engineering department, and I showed up. They assigned me to one of the engineers, and we started. Actually, the very first job that I had at Lockheed, I drew up all the pieces of a new transmission which was used on the Model 12 airplane. Now, it's another long
What plane
story.
was it? What plane? Or?
Oh, it was, well, I'll get to that. What happened, Lockheed, since it bought its way out of receivership, was still built a couple of their wooden airplanes, but only to stay alive. They actually designed and built a small transport for 10 people, which Northwest Airlines used quite extensively in that part of the country. This airplane that I was working on was called a Lockheed 12, and it was only a 6-passenger, and its main purpose was for businessmen who were now beginning to use private airplanes for travel. So this was aimed at that particular segment of society. But they also sold it to the Navy as admirals' private airplanes. Its first flight was the first part of July in 1936. That's when I joined Lockheed. The next assignment I had was structural, and my background, I guess, was structural. This Lockheed had been given a contract to build a pressurized cabin airplane for test flying to see what problems they would get into, because up until then, all flights were more or less limited to about 12 to 15,000 feet because of the need for oxygen when they got up above, I believe it was 13,000 feet. So they wanted to fly higher to get over the storms, and so to have a quieter flight. The airplane that they were modifying was an Electra with a brand new fuselage, which was round in shape and had the proper cooling, heating, and all the other facilities that go along with a closed cabin. It flew in.
Was that low wing or upper wing?
Oh, it was just low wing, the
Low
same
wing.
as the Electra, which was a low-wing two-engined. This was low-wing, and it had also two engines. That was the Lockheed 12. The Lockheed, with this pressurized cabin, was just a makeover of the Lockheed 10, which was the larger of the two airplanes.
How many men or people or persons?
It's a cabin airplane. It had the normal two pilot seats, and I don't know, it was the Army who took it over and flew it and did all their experiments in connection with a program at that time with the NACA, which eventually became the NASA.
Was it designed for personnel or for
it was for personnel to also be able to fly at high altitudes. They were trying to reach at least 20,000 feet, and if they could any higher, I don't know if they got any higher, but their aim was to do a lot of flying at the high altitudes to see what problems would come out of the flights because of the pressurized cabin that they had. And after that, they were designing the Model 14. Now this was a larger version. It was also being designed and built for Northwest Airlines. And it was a 14-passenger. It was built to cruise at close to 300 miles an hour. Its top speed was, I think, about 320 thereabouts. It was a larger airplane. Now, in order to achieve that high speed, they had a smaller wing than you normally would for that particular size airplane. But they made up for it by equipping it with the Fowler flap. Now, the Fowler flap was designed by a fellow at NACA, a fellow named Fowler, and this was a portion of the bottom of the aft of the wing would move aft until it just about got even with the nose, even with the trailing edge, and then it would bend down to 45 or whatever degrees they needed for landing. Now,
what was the overall purpose of that plane? I mean, what was it?
It was a transport airplane.
Transport.
Strictly transport.
Yeah.
Well, I think Howard Hughes used one to go around the world.
Oh.
I'm not sure. I think it was a 14. Now, there was the Model 18, which was a takeoff of the 14. It was a little bit bigger, so with a stretched fuselage. But the Fowler flap idea is what made that airplane, because they could have a smaller wing, fly faster, and when they needed to land, incidentally, the landing requirement at that time was no faster than 65 miles an hour. This was quite restrictive for air transport. So
what was the reason for that?
Well, the safety, I guess. Up until then, well, okay, I really don't know why they did it, except that it was quite instrumental in creating some kind of a point to aim for in design. And Lockheed was able to do it with the Fowler flaps. They were, the flaps actually ran out on tracks. And, but to get out to the farthest aft point, the tracks actually extended behind the trailing edge of the wing. And when the customers saw that, they shook their heads that, no, you can't have that. But Lockheed won out, because there was no other way to achieve the positioning of the follow flap to be effective. Now, that was on the Model 14. As I say, I worked on the follow flaps. And then the next project was the XP-58. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. The XP-38 was started in January of 1937. The design of the thing was quite complicated. We had several problems. One, I was assigned to the...
What was the reason for the planes that you were building? Did they have tendencies toward combat, or using them in combat, or just commercial usage?
Strictly commercial usage up to that time. But the P-38 was a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
In those days called a P-38 for pursuit, which was the designation of all airplanes used in that category. And of course, jumping ahead, they changed the designation from P to F after they established the Army divisions. That there was the Secretary of the Army, Secretary of Air Force, and Secretary, I forget the 4 or 5 divisions that they had.
So you had an active part in designing or redesigning what was ended up be the P-38 then?
That is correct, yes. I've worked on that for about a year and a half on the design. It took a long time because it was a new concept. For one thing, we had flush rivets to cut down on a drag.
You had flush what?
Rivets.
Rivets.
Yeah. And it was smooth all over. The airplane just took time to design. There was so much to it. And plus the fact that we were hiring people to do the drafting who had no connection with aviation type of design, so it was also needed to teach them how to do things, so we would have a crew.
Yeah. Well, the fact that it was a 2-engine fighter plane was unique to begin with.
Yes. Okay. Now, up to that time, the fastest airplane that the Army had was a P-40. And it was just barely made 300 miles an hour. And
were you in on the design of P-40s?
No, they were designed and built by Curtiss, back east. And so the Spitfire, the British premium fighter, was also ran maybe 325, maybe 350. Was the fastest it could go. The requirement for the P-38 was to fly at 20,000 feet at 400 miles an hour was the requirement that we had to meet. And this was accomplished again by having the follow flaps built into the wings. The airplane was built and actually flew. Its first flight was at March Field, which is near Riverside, California. It was in January. I think the date was 9th. I'm not sure. The early January. The pilot on the test flight was, I think at the time he might have been Major or second lieutenant, Ben Kelsey. And he was the only one that ever flew that airplane because on well, the airplane flew so well on its initial flight, and they put on about 10 hours of flying, and it was in pretty good shape. They decided to do a cross-country flight to establish a new record and to see that the Army requirement was satisfied. And so they took off from Riverside. He landed in Wright Field, refueled, and they talked it over with one of the generals, and they decided to fly on to New York to establish their cross-country record. So Ben Kelsey flew, landed in Ohio at the Wright Field, and then that's where he had the discussion. Then they decided to fly to New York, which he did. But on landing, on his approach at Floyd Bennett Field, his engines quit. So he was
Both of them?
both of them quit, and he was still short of the airport about 300 yards, and so he had to set it down in his golf course, which of course wrecked the airplane pretty badly, but he didn't get hurt. And but they did claim a record flight. So I forget
Why did the
number.
engines quit? Was there a logical reason?
Well, Ben Kelsey said that he thinks the carburetors iced up because he had such a long glide and with the engines just idling that he thinks the carburetors iced. Whether that's the case or not, there's some question about it, but of course I have my own opinion, which is different, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
The official
Could have lost your job on that one.
the official flight was accepted, and the official findings was that the engines had iced up, and that was it. Now, so that
What
That-
steps
that-
did you take in design or redesign then so that didn't occur again?
I was off on another project by then,
Oh,
and so I don't know all the ins and outs of what happened after that. They, of course, got a contract for 13 more P-38s. They called a YP-38, which was a designation given to new airplanes that are going to be tested by actually flying and putting it to all of the requirements. And there were 13 YPs built, and of them, only one that I know of that actually crashed because of a new phenomenon, which is I'll come back to it.
yeah.
Anyway, the P-38 was had a supercharger on each engine, which was driven by the exhaust force through this supercharger, which spun the wheels up to something like 10,000 revolutions a minute, and it actually pumped up the air that flowed into the not the carburetor, but the various pipes that fed each cylinder, so that they had high pressured air, which increased the horsepower quite a bit. It increased the ability to fly higher than 13,000 feet. And as I say, the requirement was to fly 400 miles an hour at 20,000 feet and to reach 20,000 feet in something like 8 minutes. And so anyway, the P-38 turned out to be quite good.
It was then accepted by the Army.
It was Army, and they ordered more, of course. Eventually, there were over 10,000 P-38s built. At one time, Lockheed was turning out 10 P-38s a day. And it was, well, they had an assembly line inside a hangar. Wasn't big enough, so they had assembly outside of the hangar, and we had a lot of good weather. Sometimes it rained. But
Almost faster than the time it took to provide pilots for it, I'm sure.
oh yes, well, Tony Liberer was one of the pilots hired. P-38 was flown. Oh, the test pilot on the P-38 was Marshall Heedle. He was the chief test pilot. And in the chamber that they used to test some of the things for the high altitude flights, there was a problem of some kind, and unfortunately he got the bends when they depressurized this particular
What year was that the P-38 was then accepted as the fighter plane for
the P-38 flew for the first time in January of
38 or
39.
39.
January of 1939. And I don't remember when they actually ordered the YP-38 or when they ordered the final stage. But it was probably in that 1940 era that all this was happening. And Lockheed, of course, had a big job to build up enough airplane equipment and people to build the airplane. What happened, there was a day crew and a night crew. Of course, the airplane was being year-round and day-round all the way. And the day shift was always in competition with the night shift. And there was one of the supervisors was real thank you. What was I?
You were talking about the night shift.
Oh, yes.
Day shift
The supervisor
competition.
for over both, who was actually the shop manager. I asked him one day, how come that you're getting so many airplanes out? He says, well, I've got the day shift fighting the night shift as to how much they can do. And says the winner each week would get a bottle of whiskey. Well, said the bottle of whiskey wouldn't be enough to...
That was hard to get in those days.
Oh yes. And so they were all each time fighting for the bottle of whiskey, and of course trying to make as many airplanes as they could so they could win. So sometimes the day shift won, sometimes the night shift won. So anyway,
Yeah.
these are the little things that you don't hear about. And well, I was then, as I say, assigned to the P-58. And the P-58 was a larger version of the P-38. It had two
What year was that? Was that right?
That was around 1940, 41, thereabouts.
Right, but still before the war.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Was I on the? Yeah, I was on the P-58 when the war started. And of course, the way we knew it started was on Sunday, December 7th, I was listening to the radio. We had radios in those days at my home in the living room when the announcement came that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. It was just a flat news flash. So that's the first I heard about it. Then there came not even an official proclamation, but an official story from one of the airlines that they had quoted somebody in Washington that said, it is official, Pearl Harbor has been bombed, and Congress was to meet the next day and declare war, which is what happened on December 8th.
There were no P-38s in Hawaii at that time, right?
No, none. In fact, they didn't get there till quite late. Anyway, the P-38 at that time was, I think, starting the production phase of it. And on a P-58, now I would like to elaborate a little bit on that. It used a Wright engine with 28 cylinders. A radial engine with 4 banks of 7 cylinders each. So that was, it was a pretty powerful engine.
Mm-hmm.
And
this was which plane now?
the XP-58.
The 58, the bigger version of the 38.
They built only 2 of them, mainly because after the first few flights, Northrop, who was building the XP-59 in competition, won the contract. And they painted all the Northrop airplanes black because it was used mostly at night. It was a pursuit airplane. I don't know if it had any kind of finding of targets or anything else, except they flew it at night, and it was called the Black Widow.
Black Widow,
was
yes.
a name. What did you say?
I said the Black Widows, yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, Black. That was the Northrop version. I think I was through with the P-58 design, which, I take it back. The Constellation was finishing. Then Constellation is the 4-engined, triple-tailed transport airplane that Howard Hughes so-called designed and had built for TWA. And it was kept very quiet. And the way it was done, now it comes back to me. Lockheed itself, on its own money, was designing the Model 44. And at the same time, the main reason was to hide the fact that we were designing this other airplane for Howard Hughes. So it was kind of on the secret side, whereas the Model 44 transport, which was almost like it, the Model 44, which is a smaller version of the model.
Did you have any other planes at Lockheed? Because I'm sure 100% of your work was
there
done
was
there.
the Hudson bomber.
Any famous other planes aside from 38s?
Yeah, at about the same time, England had, just before the war, purchased 200 bombers from Lockheed, which were converted Model 14s into a bomber. And before the war, there was a group of British men British
What
people.
plane is this you're referring to?
I'll get to that pretty
Oh.
soon. They were touring the various factories, aircraft factories in the United States, to see if they could buy enough airplanes with the proper specifications. By the time they came to Lockheed, one of the salesmen had pictures of everyone, had their biographies, had their wives' names, and everything, so that when he got off the airplane at the Lockheed terminal, he greeted each one by name. And I think that was crucial to the purchase. Anyway, when we heard they were coming, we built a mock-up, wooden mock-up of the model, the bomber version, I forget what they call it. Anyway,
What did you call it?
I
Oh.
don't remember it.
Oh,
No, I'm sorry, it was called the Hudson Bomber.
that's it.
And they ordered 200 of them initially. And
They were two-engine?
they were a takeoff of the Model 18, which was a stretched Model 14. The Model 18 was, its fuselage was lengthened to carry 4 more passengers.
Mm-hmm.
And it became the Lodestar,
Lodestar, yeah.
Lodestar. And so the British bought, as I said, 200 airplanes, which were built alongside the P-38. And then there was a plane for the Navy, which I believe was the Model 18 converted to the Navy's requirements. And so there were quite a few airplanes being built by Lockheed at the time, all aimed at the war. Now the Constellation itself
Was
let's say
never
that-
designed for a bomber, though, was it?
No.
No, just
It,
transportation.
it was purely transportation. You know, well, maybe you don't know, but the Army made the DC-3 that was built by Douglas. They converted it to the C-47, wasn't it? Yeah. And it had the #1 priority in the Army purchase sequence. They were #1, which surprised me. But then when you think about what it was used for, they were getting ready for the Normandy invasion that quite early. At the time, probably there was no place picked for the invasion, but the one that eventually happened at Normandy landing. Anyway, the C-69, which was the Constellation, the Lockheed Constellation, was then the ones they made were converted to the Army's requirement for parachute drops. The DC-3, Douglas DC-3 was also used. As I say, it had the highest priority.
DC-3, did you say?
DC-3, they turned it into the C-47 and was used purely to drop parachutes, paratroopers.
What was I missed the point evidently. You talked about a new bomber, a two-engine bomber, and you never named that I could pick up.
Oh.
What was it called?
The Hudson.
The Hudson.
Now that was for Great Britain,
Yes.
and they were initially ordered 200, called the Hudson bomber.
Hudson bomber.
Yes.
We never used, our Air Force didn't use them.
So far as I know, they didn't.
No.
I'm really not that familiar with that end of it. But So I was on well, to finish off the Constellation, I was assigned after the P-58 to the empennage on the Constellation, so I worked on it a while. And while I was on that program, I was one of 24, 25 people called into the conference room around June 17th, thereabouts. And Kelly Johnson, who was the fellow in charge of advanced concepts, advanced design, told us that that Lockheed had been given a contract by the Army to build, design, build, and fly a jet-powered airplane, which would be the first true jet fighter for the U.S. Now, the Germans, of course, already had the Me-262, which was a twin-engine bomber
fighter.
Powered,
262, yeah.
Powered by the two jet engines under the wings. And they also had other airplanes that were rocket propelled and really could only last 2 minutes of flight or whatever. So Lockheed, in the meantime, Lockheed had been since 1947 or 48, been actually designed a jet engine. It was on the boards. I happen to know the fellow
That
who
was
worked on
what
it.
year approximately?
It started in 1937, maybe 38, thereabouts. And the preliminary design group had also designed an airplane to carry that engine. Well, they've been pestering Wright Field to give some money toward developing the jet engine. Of course, Wright Field, like all military in those days, except the Germans, turned down the idea of a jet airplane because it would never work.
One of the biggest mistakes they probably ever made.
It was. So anyway, by that time, Kelly had convinced them that the airplane that used the Halford engine with 3,000 pounds thrust would work. So he sketched one up, and his preliminary design group designed an airplane that could do the job. So he finally took that to Wright Field in 1940.
Did it have a name at that time, or
No, nothing.
Just experimental.
And it had a designation.
Yeah.
I think it was 322, but I get that confused with another part of the story. Anyway, he came back on around the June 17th. No, he went back and came back, and on June 24th, he called us in and says, "Look, Army is buying a jet airplane from us. It has to be flying in 180 days." And no, I'm sorry, it has to be flying in 150 days. He kept 30 days to himself. Lockheed had promised to deliver it in 180 days. So it's going to be quick, dirty. It's no matter how you draw it, it doesn't have to be to our standards that we have at Lockheed. All I want to do is get the information to the shop as quickly as possible. So, and so they drew up an engineering schedule. The schedule was to complete all engineering in 75 days, which we met. And I don't want to. I shouldn't go back to the P-38, but England did buy 200 P-38s, but they had the Rolls-Royce engines, and the propellers turned the same way, whereas the Lockheed airplanes propellers were counter-rotating. The one rotated to the right, the other rotated to the left. When the British installed these Rolls-Royce engines, they got an unpleasant surprise. One was on takeoff, they had to use full rudder to control the torque at them, because both propellers, which had a lot of weight, were turning the same way, and on an airplane it tends to torque. Nowadays we we've always taken care of it with a rudder, but when you get so much with two engines, it's really scary on takeoff. Well, I have to go back to the P-38 again. When they sold the 200 airplanes to England, the pilots were reluctant to fly the P-38. It had two engines, it had a myriad of dials and switches, and it was just, had some rumors, bad rumors about it. So the Army and Lockheed sent Tony LeVere, our chief test pilot then, to the England to demonstrate what the P-38 can do. So he put on a show, climbs, barrel rolls, shut out one engine, would do all these tricks up in the air too. And the finale was flying about 100 feet above the ground with one engine dead, doing barrel rolls in front of all these pilots, and that broke the ice. Because he showed them what would happen if one engine comes out.
That's wonderful. That was it. That's before they went into combat.
Yes. Yes.
Testing, final testing of them.
Right.
What other planes did you design or have a part in that were used as combat planes in World War II?
Well, okay. Now this one was ready just after the war ended. This I'm talking about the time Kelly brought us into the conference room, told us the 150 degrees, and they had overnight built a kind of a two-story shed. It was big enough to hold all 25 people on the top level with our drafting boards and so on. It was built mostly of engine boxes because they were beginning to pile up with all the engines coming into the plant, and then the boxes were excess. So they built this lean-to for our engineers. We were upstairs, and the shop was downstairs. We also had a lock on the door, so nobody but us engineers could go upstairs, because the plane was secret. I mean, it was classified secret, so we had to treat it that way. Okay. Now the P-38, the P-8, now this was the XP-80, and along the way, somewhere, they
Bottom line, what became of it? I mean, what?
I'll come to that eventually.
Was it
okay.
put into, approved and put in
Oh, yes,
manufacturing?
they built a lot of them. They built.
And what did they call them?
It was called. I know it so well.
Oh, yeah. Were you,
It'll come to me.
were you ever aware of the what's called the Ryan Fireball, that was part jet, a hybrid jet and prop? Because
No.
we flew those off Mike area as
Oh.
an experiment. That
I-
one you weren't familiar with.
No, not at all.
And so, and Lockheed didn't go into the joint hybrid program evidently.
So far as I know,
Yeah.
the preliminary design, I'm sure have tried everything.
Yeah.
In
What was the last plane that you worked with after 35 years at Lockheed? What was the last plane that you remember that you helped or did design?
that gets. Let me finish the P-80 because it was somewhere along the line they picked up the name Lulu Bell.
Lulu Bell?
So now when you hear anyone talking about the airplane called Lulu Bell, it was the P-80. Well, actually, the first one was XP-80, was called
Yeah.
Lulu Bell. Now, Lulu Bell now is in the Smithsonian. So, anyway, so we were able to design in a hurry, we built in a hurry, and we were thinking, well, they took the airplane from Burbank to Palmdale or to Muroc, Dry Lake. In December, they put it on the trailer, of course, with the wings off, and after they got it all covered up, they also had a big propeller mounted on the trailer so that people who saw the thing and thought they knew what it was, that they would think it was a propeller-driven airplane, whereas it turned out to be jet-powered. And we took it to Lulu Bell where they were doing the initial run-up, or almost the final run-up, ready for flight in early December. They went during the final run-up. The ducts which carried the air to the engine collapsed, and of course, a lot of the parts got into the impellers and cracked one of them or dented another, and so on. So they had to get a new engine, which they did. It was over there in a few days, and that engine was then installed, and it was just as well that the first engine had this problem, because in X-raying the impeller, they found several occlusions, or so-called cracks, which were built into it because when they cast this big aluminum piece out of which it was carved, the casting didn't work properly. They had this occlusion. You have a problem, or should I just keep going?
Yeah, we're running out of film there.
Uh-oh. See, I'm talking way too much, and I'm not finished yet. ready for another hour of this stuff. I think I can do it in less than that. Finishes it.
There we are. Let's see where it's set to go. Just a minute here. Okay, if you can continue just on where you left off.
Of course, we're all put out about the engine, but the new one was installed, and they fixed the air scoops that had collapsed, and the airplane was set to fly. It was in January 8th, I believe was the date. Down in Burbank, they had 3 buses ready to take all of the people who had worked on a P-80.
Yeah. What kind of a plane? I mean, I'm from your stories, so I'm not sure what the plane was. What was it? 4-engine, 2-engine jet? Prop?
Lulabelle? Okay. It was a single engine pusher, obviously jet airplane.
Jet.
Jet. The engine was mounted obviously behind the pilot, and it had a long tube through which the air was pushed, and the opening at the rear of the empennage. Single engine. It had did not have the Fowler flaps, mainly because we wouldn't have had time to design them for this airplane. So we just used the standard hinged flaps that practically all the airplanes use these days.
What was its purpose? What was bottom line? Was it a fighter? Was it
It was a fighter.
Commercial? Okay.
It was the XP, P for pursuit airplane.
Mm-hmm.
XP-80. Yeah. And the buses took us up to Muroc Dry Lake. In California, near Lancaster, Palmdale, and Mojave is the area that is used for flight testing. The dry lakes at certain times of the year are really dry. This was January, but we had very little rain that fall, so the lake was dry, and it was maybe 10 miles long. So the airplanes, the XP-59 was a Bell designed twin engine, but the engines were too small. The airplane was too heavy, so it never got anywhere. So we were actually the U.S. second jet engine powered airplane. And
did they drop it off of the end of the table then when it didn't come through on its testing, or?
No, it came through okay.
Oh, it did?
Yeah, oh yeah. It was the P-38 that landed short of the field.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Okay, now the P-80 was ready for flight at the North Base, and we were not allowed on the base.
Mm-hmm.
You figure that out. So they put us across the road from where the hangar with the P-80 was, and it was kind of a slight rise. It might have been 50 feet higher than the place where the P-80 was being gotten ready. So anyway, we couldn't tell what was going on. We could see what was going on, and of course we were mystified. And so the first pilot to fly was Milo Bertram. I don't know if we ever heard of him. He was chief pilot at Lockheed at the time. He was the one who took off, circled, came back, landed. And that's not what you do on the first flight. But he had some problem. I think the landing gear wouldn't come up or something. So he landed, they fixed whatever was necessary, and in about half an hour he took off again and headed due east out of sight. Well, so we all wondered, well, what happened? But in about, maybe 5 minutes, we saw a tiny speck coming coming west from where he headed. And as it came faster and faster. And just as he hit the crowd, he pulled straight up and did barrel rolls. I mean, and the noise was something really weird. So after his barrel rolls, he glided down and landed. And
did he break the sound barrier in this?
No, not yet. No, they never did in this airplane. And so he landed, got out of the cockpit, or maybe he was still in, and Kelly, the chief designer, went up to him and asked him, was she a witch or a lady? And he said, Milo said, that is the sweetest airplane ever built. I've never flown a better one than this. So after that, of course, everybody was real happy. They did have some problems that later they had to work on, but that came with later flights.
Whatever became of the plane then, if it was that good?
That plane was Lulabelle, is now in the Smithsonian on display. So
did any plane become of it, the
No.
replica of it? Or?
Oh, well, okay, they built then the Y version. See, our Army gives experimental airplane, Y, which is the development, test flying, is the Y version, and then they get the production version. Well, I don't know when they ordered, but they ordered a whole bunch of them. And so the first 13 were Y P-38s, and after that they were P-38s. This regular, the X went to Smithsonian. And
what was its top speed, do you think?
Oh, well, it was supposed to be 400 miles an hour. 400? It officially flew at 414 miles per hour. That's what they did over measured courses. So they met the requirements. Up to 20,000 feet in 8 minutes, and then fly 400 miles an hour at 20,000 feet.
How fast?
400.
Oh.
And they did fly 414. So it met the goal.
Wasn't much faster than a prop plane then,
well,
by and large.
Later.
But it was a jet, so.
It was a jet, and it was the fastest. Now the P-51, it had dive with the propeller. I forget what. There was one made that was towed upstairs by a bomber, and it dropped and flew without a propeller, diving straight down. I don't know if it reached Mach 1. Maybe it did. I don't remember too much about that. So anyway, after the flight of the P-80, they got back on the buses and went down Mint Canyon to a wide spot and stopped, and there were lots of sandwiches and beer and everything else for a picnic because of the success. Well, the picnic was set up for either way, but anyway, we all stopped and guzzled beer and had sandwiches and had a good time. And while we were there was a tremendous roar in the canyon, and it was Tony LeVere in a P-38 had decided to give us the dive. So he went down the canyon alongside of us, and oh, what a roar! But
He was going to get a little thrill send off. Is that the last plane that at Lockheed that you designed or helped design and worked on, or did you have some others?
Oh no, there are others.
There were others past that.
This same group that built or designed the P-80 then designed the P-80A, which had certain modifications, one of which was to add tip tanks, which I didn't work on, but was done in our area. And we did pickup work here and there on the flight, on the YP-30s, YP-80s.
Why more or less all jets, or were you still into props at that time?
No, well, they had, of course, they built props up to the end of the war. Now the 80 came along, and by the time it got through all of its qualifying, and they had built 2 or 3 P-80s, which were sold to the Army.
What year would that be?
Well, that was toward 1945.
And toward the end of the war.
The war ended, but
never went into combat.
P-80 never went into combat until it got to Korea.
Yeah.
It was in that.
Oh, it did go in.
Oh yes, and I imagine succeeding wars. The only one I know of was in Korea, because it shot down a jet fighter, the first one, or whatever. So anyway, that's the story of the P-38, the P-80. Why do I keep saying P-80? Now, one of the mysteries is Kelly's group that did the P-80 became known as the Skunk Works. That's it. That's the official emblem.
The what bunch?
The Skunk.
Skunk bunch.
Skunk Works.
Oh.
And the way that happened was we were working on the XP-90 by that time. This was about the end of the war. And they had pushed us into a small corner of a huge hangar, but we were about maybe 30, 40, 50 people, engineers, and it was so tight we had all of our drafting boards practically nose to nose, and we had one telephone, and it was in the middle of this group. That was me, the boards of a couple of kind of wags, fellas that were always pulling stunts and so forth.
Yeah.
So they would want to answer the phone. Kelly's morgue, or they would answer the phone. Kelly's Pizzeria,
Yeah.
and or the last one, Kelly's Skunk Works. Well, what happened at that time, a fellow named Al Cap
Mm.
had a daily cartoon strip in the
Yes, Al Cap,
newspapers
yeah.
called Little Abner. And so one of the things was that they had a skunk works where they made the joy juice. I forget what.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of it. But anyway, so that's where the name Skunk Works came from.
Yeah.
Well, they did. Then Kelly, who heard that we
Mm.
were referred to as Skunk Works, he had a fit. Anyway, the word got to the customer at Wright Field.
Mm-hmm.
So they started to call Kelly's operation Kelly's Skunk Works.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when a customer does something, you listen. So Kelly changed his mind, and then he, of course, endorsed it. And then they made this cartoon up.
Yeah.
And so this is the
Yeah.
official
Yeah.
Skunk Works
Yeah.
emblem. And but this all happened a couple of years after we started.
Yeah.
The
Well,
after
You had quite an illustrious career in design and engineering. Let's see, you were with Lockheed 35 years.
Yes, but
And you retired when? Approximately what year now?
1971.
1971 you
But
retired.
there was a lot yet that I didn't cover, because after that I was assigned to a project called the X-7. Now this was a project where Lockheed was required to fly an engine, a Marquardt ramjet engine,
Mm-hmm.
which don't start lighted until Mach 1.2. So we had to design an airplane, which when dropped from a B-29 for 5 seconds would be pushed by a big booster, 105,000 pound
Mm-hmm.
thrust for 5 seconds, 4 seconds, was enough to push this little airplane, which was powered by this Marquardt engine, up to Mach 1.5.
Was this for military service? Or?
No, this was X-7. Well, I don't. It might have been, but it was to test this Marquardt engine, which can't light until Mach 1.2, so you have to get it up to speed. How do you do it? Well, Lockheed came up with a plan, and to have it pushed by a big booster and a tail, which had also tails, and had to be carried to 30,000 feet
Mm-hmm.
under the left wing of an airplane. A B-29 did it.
Mm-hmm.
And the requirement was to bring back the engine intact. Now, whenever you shoot anything in the air, it lands somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we were required to bring the engine back intact after flight. So they designed an airplane to do that, and a parachute system to bring the situation back. And that's where I was assigned. Well, at first I was assigned to separate the airplane and the booster after the booster did its job. Then I was assigned to help on the parachute system. We had first a pilot chute which pulled out a real strong chute called the drag chute.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on for a while. Then there was a timer that cut it loose, and it on the way back, pulled out the main chute. This happened around, 100,000 feet. Yeah, about that. Maybe less, maybe 50,000. But then it would alight on the ground, which at 28 feet per second would have wrecked the engine. So what we did, we came up with a spike. Have you tried to drive a spike into the ground, or any spike or anything? It takes a lot of work, doesn't it? Okay, that's all energy spent. And so to bring the airplane to zero velocity, we had about a 5-foot spike that went into it. Since all the work was done out at Holloman Air Force Base, there's very little rocks around, so the spike worked very well. It could absorb all the energy, kept the airplane upright until the mechanics came over to take the engine off. But that way, we were able to fly, I think, 50 flights for the Marquardt, with every one brought back my parachute. And anyway, that was my assignment, and I spent a lot of time at Holloman. The years of, that was around 1950.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was given an assignment as an assistant project engineer on a Navy target that was being built like the X-7, and it had the engines and all.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a continuation of the X-7 that I stayed on for a while, and trying to think of which airplane I was working on when I got called into the office. So that for the P-80. This
yes.
is P-80. Or was it? I'm getting confused. I'm sorry. So then, since that was being done as part of a research area, we began thinking satellites around 1950.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was assigned to the satellite system as a structural engineer. And we did some rather interesting test flights and so on until around 1954. And then they asked Lockheed to design a satellite that could take pictures of Russia.
So you
and
went from planes to a satellite, huh?
a satellite, and there was a camera in the nose which I had to surround with structure, and then there was a nose cap which, after it had flown, was disconnected and came down through the air, first on a little chute and then eventually on a large chute, which was then picked up by an airplane that had a boom, a couple of booms in the back with a cable across and had a bunch of hooks on it. And they would capture this nose cone, which was being lowered by a parachute. They would capture the parachute and bring back the nose cone, which had all the film in it. Then that would be taken to some base where they analyzed the pictures and so on. Well, we were able to, I forget how many of those Okay. I was assigned to, and the camera itself was being done in another building. And I was one of the few engineers that had access to the camera situation because I was designing the support for it and also the surrounding cone. And so I worked on that for quite a while. Eventually, well, they did quite a few.
Yeah, we're going to move along here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, okay, that was the satellites. Anyway.
You can tell me the last part of your, what you did
Okay,
before you
so
retired.
as I was in satellite system, and this multi-payload design, which later on carried a camera that was digitally able to transfer the pictures while still in flight. So they got instant pictures, but that was pretty far into the system after I had left. Then I was assigned to a measurable assignment, which was we had a department that would lend engineers to anyone who needed one. Well, I was then a manager with I don't know, an entirely new phase that I disliked because up until then I was always on new stuff, engineering stuff. But then they began putting me on and assigned me on manager stuff, and I didn't like it, so I was on that. Finally, on a wagon truck that Lockheed had designed, believe it or not, and that's where I retired. I just could stand only so much of that. And I was eligible for retirement in January of 1971. But on the truck we had a problem that took longer, and I don't think we ever got it solved. But I stayed with it till June and retired in June of 1971.
So you stayed on and remedied
I
the
stayed
problem.
on after the airplanes. But I had moved to Sunnyvale in 1957 and stayed on until 71.
So when we look up in the sky and see a satellite, you probably might have had something to do with that.
Probably the nose cone part only, because that's what we ended up doing, was the various nose cones. Well, people had different satellites that they wanted tested, and if it was a funny item, we would design the nose cone.
Yeah.
Then, of course, the cameras were changed to two cameras, and we brought those back by nose cones to film. So that was earlier. And then, anyway, the satellite was called the Agena. We built a whole mess of them for the Air Force, because by this time it was Air Force. And I was on those cones quite a few, which I, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I can't talk, because I've been debriefed, and I've been
because
quiet.
they're secret.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I ended up.
Now, when you retired, never did ask you if you were married, you've had children, and.
I married in 1938.
38?
When I was still in Burbank, and my wife died in 2005. So I had 67 years of marriage.
Amazing.
And that's these days unheard of.
And people don't live that old, much
No,
less
well,
be buried that long, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And
Well, you've had, as I say, what preceding the World War II, of course, you went to college, went to Lockheed as an engineer and served your time during there in a more valuable position, but I'm sure the government thought than being a doughboy.
Oh, yes.
And then from that time on, your career went all the way through to 1971
Yes.
with Lockheed, with the same company.
In
That's
the
amazing,
space,
I tell you.
space business.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
as I say,
anyway, that's-
we've been talking to Joe Szep, who is a resident. Where do you live, Joe, now?
Oh, I live in Morgan Hill.
Where?
Morgan Hill, Morgan, Morgan Hill.
Oh, Morgan Hill.
Yeah. That's-
And you've lived there how long?
Oh, about 33 years.
Yeah.
About soon after I retired,
Oh, yes.
I moved there.
You do things in a long way. Indeed you do. Well, I've been talking to Joe Szep, as you know, in regard to his engineering work during World War II in Korea. And Mr. Szep, I want to thank you for your service to our country. And thanks for coming in and sharing us with your experiences during that period of time. Very interesting indeed. Thank you very much.
I'm always glad to talk about it. So.